This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April Evergreen Cataloging Working Group meeting. I am Jennifer Weston, the facilitator of the Cataloging Working Group, joined by quite a few members of the organizing committee, whose names you see here at the top of the agenda as always. Thank you all for being here, and happy spring, everybody. We've got a few different topics to cover today. Let's cover some basic logistics. Thank you all for, you obviously found us with a new meeting link. This will be our new meeting link going forward. All of the, let me just make a quick note about the video recordings from the previous meetings are still there, but thanks to Rogan, who is with us today, those are all going to be made available on the Evergreen YouTube channel. As soon as I send them to him, we'll start working on getting those in place so that the links that are on our wiki will still work. It's really probably the biggest change about using this new link is we had to move our video recordings. Other than that, it'll just be recorded as always, following the Evergreen recording policy. Anybody that's here for the first time, welcome. We'll say that this agenda turns into our meeting notes and will be posted on the wiki immediately afterwards. If you have questions, feel free to turn on your microphone at any time. I don't mute you all unless, we start getting noisy, then I'll do that. So I think that's it for logistics wise, and we can just get going. The agenda today, I'll do my quick welcome and updates as usual. We're joined by Galen to talk about the very exciting release of Evergreen 3.7. Rogan will talk about the exciting Evergreen conference that's coming up in May, and then I'll spend a little time talking about Mark Batch Edit, primarily for the reason to kind of give us a baseline for talking about Mark Batch Edit going forward, to kind of make sure we're all on the same page and kind of get a kind of a state of the union as far as Mark Batch Edit goes. It does need some documentation help, which is why we're just kind of, this is the first in a series of conversations about batch editing records in Evergreen. And then there'll be some time for community discussion. That said, I will move right into, I've already said welcome. My only announcements were about the changing of the meeting link. The other announcements are related to topics that we're going to expand upon, so I will not take up any time there, other than to say that here with Evergreen release notes, I've got everything's updated there. The tabular release notes are available and are up to date with 3.7. And the wiki's up to date too. So all of those links are current and have the most recent data, most recent information available from the release team. That said, Galen, are you ready to talk a little about 3.7?
I am.
The floor is yours.
All right. So jumping first into cataloging, 3.7 is relatively modest on the direct technical services front. The biggest change is that the display field for the publisher now draws from both the 264 and the 260 instead of just the 260. Just part of the ongoing program to make more use of the RDA tags. For any of you who read or speak Czech, the sample data set used for testing now includes a handful of records in that language. All that said, there are also some features that touch more indirectly on technical services. The main one is the Bootstrap OPAC, is closer to becoming the primary OPAC for Evergreen. It's marked as the default for 3.7, although there are still some discrepancies to squash between what's supported in TPAC versus what's supported in the Bootstrap OPAC. But there are also a couple, other features that maybe if interested or in your during your workflow. So, for example, the OPAC now has the ability to sort the items table by geographic proximity. So this is mostly meant to support patrons who happen to live in an Evergreen's consortium's service area, or a large multi-branch system where it's feasible to engage in street races to see who will get to their copy of the most recent hot book first. More seriously, it is meant to be a mechanism where to help patrons who might feasibly have more than one branch or library where they could pick up holds without driving too far afield. And it occurs to me, it might be a little hard to measure, but it would be interesting to see for any consortia in particular that use this feature, whether it results in any, presumably modest but measurable decrease in the number of transits. If it's letting at least a few patrons transit themselves to the item rather than moving the materials. Another aspect for the public catalog is a new concept of library groups, also known as library lassos. And this is a mechanism for saying, ignore the the hierarchy in the org unit tree, and instead we can define arbitrary collections of org units that can set a search context. So that's just a mechanism to say, if you have, say, a bunch of libraries that are, say, geographically close to each other, but they're not all under the same system due to a quirk of geography. Some patrons might find it useful to be able to search by that predefined group. It's also a way of perhaps grouping together libraries that have a certain kinds of distinctive collections. Another another feature of note, carousels in the OPAC no longer pick their order completely randomly. So whether you're defining a manual carousel or one of the automatic ones, the order of titles now makes sense. So enough about 3.7. What's not in 3.7? So the big thing, of course, is the Angular volume copy editor, which I think is pretty close to one of the more actively tested bugs with lots of feedback given. So kudos to the Evergreen cataloger community, but it wasn't quite ready for 3.7. That said, I think it's very close, and I think we can expect that it will be 100% and make it into Evergreen 3.8. Another thing with respect to the acquisitions side of technical services is, to one degree or another, I'm pretty confident that more Angular acquisition, so deliverables will be present in 3.8. The specifics will depend, but almost as certainly, some of the administrative interfaces that Equinox has been working with ECDI on, as well as a very good chance of some purchase interface, purchase order and line item interface angularization that Bill Erickson has been doing for King County. At the moment, serials, not much to say about it, although please, if you're interested in serials, please do go to the serials IG meeting at the conference. And another thing that I do expect to make some progress on, although I'm not sure where exactly it will land, is following up on my Mark Lint presentation to do some work to beef up record quality and issue identification tools in the Mark editor. One other thing that just occurred to me, jumping back to the geographic proximity sorting. One of the things that this feature added is it lets you store the geographic coordinates of each org unit. And that's something that potentially could be quite interesting for reporting on lots of matters entirely separate from the item table sorting. So would you want to animate how materials flow to and from, say, a central cataloging office in your consortium? You would actually gain, Evergreen would, be, storing the information that you would need to produce that kind of animation. So, and similarly on the resource sharing side. So I think the geographic sorting feature, in one sense, could become very interesting for reasons that have nothing to do with patrons and their drag races on the streets. And if any of you work with colleagues who are GIS experts, in your municipality or wherever, there might be some interesting collaboration opportunities. So I think that takes me to the end of what I have to say about 3.7. Are there any questions for me?
Galen, those geographic coordinates or any of that geographic information, are we going to be able to get that information in reports at any point? Any kind of reporting on that?
Yeah, so the libraries coordinates, once they're entered, would be available for any report that uses the org unit as one of the reporting sources. And that's just inherently available right off the bat. Now, one thing I should mention as a caveat is intentionally for patron privacy reasons, the feature does not record anything about the geographic coordinates or more likely the addresses that any patrons have entered. But otherwise, with respect to tying the library's geographic coordinates to any transactions, that would be fully reportable.
Great, thank you.
Great answer. I wanted to point out that Ava is with us today. You talked about the Czech language records that are now in the test data set, and I just wanted to say welcome to Ava and see if you wanted to add anything about the translation work that's being done in Evergreen while we're all together here as catalogers. If you've got your microphone available there.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure whether I'm able to tell something about translation. There's a problem with some with the grade of I'm sorry. Uh, the coding values, because we have problem to translate it the way that fit to the grade. So I don't know how it is now in the new Angular catalog. I haven't seen it yet. But I think there's no special problem with cataloging. Only problem is that we are not able to have the context help, the description of the field in Czech language currently. I think it has been reported a few years ago in the old catalog, and I believe it will change in some time. But I don't think there is a problem with translation of catalog and so on. I'm sorry, because I currently
I,
was having a
I
problem.
just
I didn't catch the beginning of the of the
That's
question.
fine. I'm just so excited that you're with us, and I wanted to also promote. You're going to be doing a session at the conference, so I wanted to introduce you to the group here too, to so that they would know a little about the session that you're going to be doing, talking about translation is not just a simple thing. That you've been working on that for a long time. We want to thank you for that, and we look forward to your session.
Thank you. But I don't think there's a special topic for cataloging exactly.
We're finding that we add on all kinds of side topics to cataloging because anything about the OPAC really does affect us in
Yes,
some way, and we just like to know how that works. So thank you for being here.
I'm glad. It's nice.
Mhm. I'll finish it. Okay. Anybody have any questions for Galen about 3.7? I have a question, Galen. Do we have a community server up yet, or when will we for people to play with 3.7?
Right. I believe there was one server put up during the release candidate period by Emerald. It may still be up. As far as the Equinox demo, a public demo, I'd say most likely by next week.
Okay. So I'll just put a note that we'll promote that
Yeah.
when the community server is ready, because we talk so much about these great things. I want people to be able to see them themselves. And of course, we'll be able to do that together at the conference too. Anybody else questions about 3.7 before we move on to talk a little about the Evergreen conference? Thank you so very much, Galen, and thanks for leading the release team. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and we
Thank you
appreciate
very
it. We're
much.
excited. Okay, I want to back up before we talk about the conference and add one note about the documentation for 3.7. I said that I've got all the release notes there. If you go to the Evergreen documentation menu now, you'll notice it just says 3.6. However, because this is now Antora, if you click on the 3.6 documentation, and this is the new Antora version of Docs, there's this drop down, and can you see this on my screen? It's at the bottom left. You can now choose between 3.6 and 3.7. They live in the same tent there that you can just, wrong word, but they live in the same place. So if you can see that at the bottom, that's how you get to 3.7 documentation. outside of just the release notes. I meant to point that out earlier. Yeah, thanks, Reeve. It's a tent now, isn't it? Yes. Okay. So as you change your settings for your thing there, I'm going to change that back to 3.6. There we go. That was it about the note. And thank you for being patient with me as I back up to talk about documentation. Now, the floor is available for Rogan Hamby to talk about the Evergreen Conference.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit in danger of preaching to the choir here, but I'm going to say one thing a little bit in retrospect and then kind of do a pitch for anyone who's still on the fence about attending the conference. The thing in retrospect is it occurred to me while everyone was talking earlier that if I rewound my brain around 10 years ago to the early conferences, I remember technical services staff complaining that there wasn't a whole lot for them at the conference. And now in recent years, look at the schedules of presentations, and it just feels like there's a lot. And I feel like the diversity of topics that we cover at the conference have become really rich. And not only for pure catalogers, but of course, many catalogers wear multiple hats at their libraries. So not just in technical services, but also in adjacent topics. I think there's a lot for people. So this is where I start the pitch for anyone who's still on the fence. First up, I want to mention our keynote speaker. It's Becky, I'm probably going to mispronounce her last name, Yaus. It keeps looking like used to me, but I think that's just my brain wanting to combine those double O's.
If I may, it's Becky Yaus.
It is Yaus. Okay. She's a great speaker. She's going to be talking about privacy. She's really excited about speaking at the event. I don't want anybody to miss that. I think that's worth the $75 conference fee by itself. But in addition to that, there's a lot of other technical services presentations being done. Jonathan Moore is going to be talking about training catalogers and what his consortium has done. There are interest group meetings for several different technical services interests. There's going to be one about catalogers organizing locally that has a whole host of people that I think it's Elaine Hardy heading up, but there are representatives from a lot of organizations there. They, even in their poor judgment, have decided to allow me to talk about some cataloging related topics. This is going to be a little bit more for people newer to Evergreen beyond the standalone bib, but I think it will have some useful information. And I want to comment that we're using a platform that's very different from some others you may be familiar with. If you have done conferences in this last year on things like Zoom and you're like, I just sitting there and just watching a stream passively for hour after hour is mind numbing, and I don't want to do that. Hopin's a little different. Hopin aims to recreate an in-person experience. And we will have spaces for people to gather and be able to talk one-on-one and have impromptu get-togethers and work together if they want to. So you will be able to have more of that experience of being in a shared space and being able to sit down and have conversations and collaborate with others if you want, that you don't have in something like Zoom. And I'll mention quickly, aside from I know I'm only here for the conference, but I'll mention the pre-conference too. It's only $50, and there's some great topics on it, including Chris Sharp's reporting. And there you go, cheap tickets. You don't have to travel. You can have an infinite supply of caffeine so long as you stocked it yourself. I don't see a reason not to attend. So that's my pitch, and I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thanks, Rogan. And while you do that, I'm going to bring up the conference schedule so we can all look at it together.
Yeah, I'll note, I was going to drop a link in the text discussion, but it was already in the schedule, so there you go.
Yeah. So there we go. So we can see and I'll point out that the schedule is on one page on the website, and then the full program descriptions are also available. They're linked separately if the titles intrigue you and you want to see more about them. So pre-conference tracks are listed here, and there's the Pines. There's one about holds, and the Rogan's going to be here almost every day at the conference. So we've got some really great things going on there. And of course, catalogers we've long held a close relationship with the documentation interest group. So we'll be participating in the Hackfest at the at the end of the conference as it's closing up, and Lynn and Blake are doing some training again, a 2-hour training on how to get more involved in doing documentation if you're interested in that. Just kind of going through here quickly, you can see that there are quite a few catalogers that are doing presentations, and thank you to everybody who's agreed to do that. Kate and I are going to talk a little about icons because that's what we've talked about that a bit already in our working group session, so we're going to bring that together in a very specific way. We've got, I'm not going to go through all of these. I just encourage you to scroll through these and pick out your favorites. They will all be recorded so that if you find yourself torn between which one to go to, you can always catch up later. All the interest groups are meeting. The session that Rogan's going to lead, called Ask Not What Evergreen Can Do For You, is really for people that are interested in getting involved in interest groups or working groups like ours. So we'll be represented on that to try to recruit more people to join us for the cataloging working group and talk about how all these different working groups operate throughout the year. Our meeting, that's what I was scrolling for, is on Wednesday of the conference. So this is more of the annual cataloging interest group, and Elaine will be leading that, and I will be there to just provide kind of some backup for based on some of the things that we've got going on in the wiki. But it's really kind of more, and I used this phrase earlier, but more kind of State of the Union. How are things developing in the cataloging world? And Elaine, I don't know if you want to say more about what we usually do at the annual meeting to give people a preview.
I think usually we just, I usually open it up to let everybody talk about, I don't want it to be a gripe session. I want it to be a, what's good about Evergreen right now? What's could see improvement, where would we like to see a little bit of development or a lot of development? And just kind of like I said, a state. I prefer it's a state of cataloging, but I kind of prefer it to come from the community than just from me, because Pines is a little different in how we have implemented Evergreen, excuse me. So I always think it's better to have everybody's perspective.
Thanks. And I always like that it's just a discussion too, so we don't go with a very set agenda to say here's what we're going to talk about. It is more to give a little introduction to what's going on, and then just you're there to let's see what questions people have. And so it's nice that we're able to do that again this year. I know that we missed out on some of that last year, so we're going to try to put a little more structure around it. Thank you, Elaine.
Well,
yep. And Rogan's right. Last year we kind of stayed away from submitting lots of things to the conference. Of course, it was a shorter conference because we knew we had our cataloging working group, and a lot of the feedback we got was, where did the cataloging sessions go? So they're back in force this year. So please take a look at everything that's there. Quite a few of the people, as Rogan said, are the catalogers organizing locally are here on the call today. Elaine's going to do that again. Jessica from NC Cardinal and Janet Schrader. On Thursday are going to be just talking about how their local cataloging groups work. Anyway, and then we'll end up with carousels there too. So lots of great stuff. Anybody have any questions about anything they've seen already on the conference schedule that you just had questions about and wanted to ask while you've got representatives from the conference committee here today? We can put Rogan on the spot. Okay.
Go for it. I'll just say in passing before I give it the floor real quickly. Also, as you attend the conference, think about if you want to present. We have great people that present every year, and they're wonderful people, but I know that there's a whole lot of people out there who have done amazing things in Evergreen. They're doing amazing things every day, and we'd love to hear from more of those voices. I completely understand the desire to not, stand up in front of a group of people and talk. I don't like doing it either. But I mean, it'd be wonderful to hear from everybody at the conference and hear more voices. So that's
here. Thanks. Absolutely. More the merrier. And if you don't want to present alone, we can always pair you up with somebody. Anything else about the conference? Yes, I wanted to say that the Hopin platform being more interactive means that we're also going to have the ability to have these kind of hangout rooms to where if you find that there's a topic that you want to talk about, that you're inspired by something you've heard and you want to just brainstorm, or you have questions about something you've heard in a conference, we'll have a room dedicated specifically to catalogers and cataloging topics that we'll make sure has people monitoring, that people will be monitoring it throughout the conference. And it's also somewhere that you can just kind of come to between sessions during the whole week of the conference, to just kind of have those impromptu kinds of conversations that would happen in a real world environment. That's nice to have too. We'll be around after the cataloging interest group meeting for a while afterwards too, in that room, monitoring that. So more information about that's coming, but a Hopin platform is going to be able to give us that kind of flexibility that I'm really looking forward to. And if you have a specific topic, and I just wanted to say that Shannon Douglas in chat gave us a great idea about authority control, and this is a to authority control or not to authority control. I really like that idea. I also think that we've had several questions about authorities in general, that we could almost just have our own little authorities mini that's not a dialogue, a mini session in our hangout room there in the cataloging room and Hopin during the conference. So I'm going to put that note on my notes so that when we start structuring the how we're going to communicate and how we're going to give updates during the conference among catalogers, that this idea doesn't get lost. So thank you for that, Sharon. Okay, that said, we're pretty much right on time. Thanks again, Rogan. Oh, yes, and Janet says cross-references. See, we've got all kinds of topics. We could do a half day on authorities. And upcoming meeting schedule goes without saying that May will be held during the conference. We will not have a separate meeting like this during the month of May. We will have our interest group meeting there and then the hangout rooms, which means our next meeting will be on June 8th, the second Tuesday at 2, same link, and we'll kind of just revisit ideas that came out of the conference. And if there's one or two that we feel like we want to act on right away, we'll do that in June. The agenda was a little shifted around from our normal order this month because I wanted to get those two topics off the top of the agenda so that we could spend some time. And then, so I've just added in celebrations down here very briefly. I just want to thank everybody that participated in Bug Squashing Week. Special thanks to Taryn, who organized that as always. The link to the results is there. Bug Squashing Week, of course, led right up to the work that was done with the release of 3.7. So you absolutely is one of the biggest ways you can get involved in testing and providing feedback. So thanks. And I will not spend much time on the Catalogers Connect section here. Here are all the different interest groups as a standing agenda item. I've got all their meeting schedules there. I've got what I know of to be their next meeting dates, recognizing that most all of these groups will also be meeting at the conference. Does anybody from any of these groups want to provide an update, or is there anything you'd like to promote here before I move on? I will just reiterate that there will be a documentation hack fest after conference on the Friday there. So I encourage us to participate that to the extent that we have the time to do that. You don't have to know how to do the documentation. It's more about recognizing and going through. You can identify documentation that is needed. So that's important. Okay. So Catalogers Connect, we're a busy group. Launchpad Bugs, I don't want to skip over that too quickly. I did leave the ones on here from last month and noted that one of them was included in 3.7. Anybody have any new ones they want to add to this list? We always like to provide that opportunity if you've got one that you want people to add heat to or comment on. Okay, feel free to do that yourselves too. You just add a link on there if you want to. Of course, always use the listserv if you encounter something and want people to add heat or want to look at it. We're really good at that. Skip over the Angular staff catalog this month because I think we did enough reviewing of that leading up to 3.7. As Galen said, we haven't seen a lot of changes between 3.6 and 3.7 so far in the Angular staff catalog, but we're on the lookout because, as he said, we've been providing lots of feedback and we'll be watching for that in future versions of 3.7, whether it's 3.7.1 or 3.7.2. Okay, any questions before I start what's going to be a brief mark edit conversation. Anything else we want to make sure we get on the agenda? While I take a sip of water. Okay. Well, what this is intended to be is not necessarily a how-to. And I wonder if there's anybody here that has not used Mark Edit in Evergreen, Mark Batch Evergreen. Because I like to make sure that I'm not oversimplifying something if people are already using Mark Edit. So please leave me a note in chat if I feel like we should be starting at a different point here. What my goal with this, let me close this out so I get there. My goal with this presentation is to start, because we've had this topic come up several times as a suggestion, about talking about Mark Batch Edit in Evergreen. This is, as I said before, is really just going to be our baseline for that conversation. And I'll spend 10 minutes talking about it, maybe. And then I would just want to get in our notes where we want to go from here. And then again, hope to use time at the conference to build upon the kinds of things that we want to be able to do with Mark Batch Edit. So here's my notes. That's me. Very, very briefly, if you are unfamiliar with cataloging Mark Batch Edit, it just lives there in the cataloging action menu. That's not actually the bottom. I just cut off for this, for getting a screenshot, but it lives under Mark Batch Edit, Import, and Export. And I see Elaine's note. Yes, it has been very buggy. And my next tab will I'll explain a little more about where I want to go with this too. What it's supposed to do, this Mark Batch Edit, is allow you to batch edit Mark records in Evergreen, so you don't have to pull them out and edit them, or you don't have to edit them before you put them back into Evergreen, to do some very specific things. Add a field, remove a field, or change the contents of a field. And this would be for records that are, how do you identify the records you're going to change? You either put them in a record bucket, or you have a CSV file, or you can change an individual bib record, which is what I spend most of my time testing, is just an individual bib record before I actually do batches, as most of us would. I've got 3.5 and 3.6 Evergreen versions here, so you can see that there's not a lot of difference about where this would live. It's still in the cataloging menu, and I've done that on most of the screens here. So it is, as it says, it's an editing tool inside Evergreen. What can it do? It can, you probably will pick up on the next tab is going to be what it can't do. But this page says it can delete all instances of a specific tag. So if you want to wipe out all of a 900 or 992, or you can just remove them all. You can delete all instances of a specific tab if a particular subfield has a value in it. So if you don't want to remove all 650s, just those with a 2 subfield with those fast headings, you can do that. If you want to delete all instances of a specific subfield, if you decide those H subfields, those GMDs finally have to go, you can just batch edit them. And you can get more granular than that. You can identify a specific set of subfields, not just the H. I couldn't come up with a great example of that this morning, but you could do that too. So all those delete options you have, you can add a new field, you can add a subfield to an existing field, and you can replace data in a specific field or subfield. And my example here is, this is a real life example from me of probably 9 years ago at this point. I had a cataloger that decided Alexander McCall Smith's last name was really Smith, and I had to go back and undo them, and it was painful. And had I been able to do that through Mark Batch Edit, this would have saved me so much time. So these are the kinds of things you can do, is I could have fixed Alexander McCall Smith all at once. Now, what does it not do? You can't swap data from one field to another. Specifically, the thing that I am dreaming of, the day when we can actually, within Evergreen, normalize the 020, you can't take that PBK out of the A subfield and move it to a Q using the Mark Batch Edit functionality. Just can't do that yet. You can't do complex things like dedupe your Mark records. You can't do complex things like, let's look at all these different varieties of things that, if this tag does that and the second tag does that, you can't look across tags to do any kind of analysis. So it is kind of a simple add, delete, replace tool, but it is a robust add, delete, replace tool. Just a note here, this is not the day to talk about Mark Edit, but if you're familiar with Mark Edit, you know that it is most certainly a robust tool and can do several of those things we've just talked about. And I do hope that we can do a sessional mark edit sometime in the very near future. It's a free editing utility. I've got just a link there out to their resources. I did want to point out one of the things that I've seen in Mark Edit in the last year. I'm not really sure when it was added, but I've just started using it in the last year, is you can use Mark Edit outside of Evergreen to add RDA fields. And to do that normalization, the 020, there's this pretty little button, and all you have to do is click it and Mark Edit. But you have to do that outside of Evergreen and then move the records back in. So that's moving data around.
Jennifer, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Am I correct in thinking that you can't do any batch editing of the fixed fields?
The control fields?
And the 008 or...
Yeah. I tested those again because and I almost put that, I'm glad you asked that question, because I almost put that on what it cannot do. The only thing I found that I could do is, for example, if there is no 007 on there now at all, and you want to add a complete 007, you can do that using Mark Batch Edit. You can't replace it. So if you just want to fix pieces of the 007, you can't do that. I'm trying to think. It's clunky, and what's the word Elaine used? I mean, it was buggy. It's very, very buggy. But in that specific instance, you can just add one if it's not there. And again, I've only tested the 007, so I think it's something that we should spend a little more time documenting. There's an old Launchpad bug. In fact, that's probably what my next, no, it's not there yet. An old Launchpad bug that talked about control fields, I think is worth revisiting and seeing what our findings are in some of the more recent versions of Evergreen. Okay. Any other questions? Just stop me if you do. This is really quickly just talking about documentation. The interesting thing about Mark Batch Edit is the documentation is exactly the same in Evergreen's versions 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, and 3.7. It looks a little different in Antora, but the content is exactly the same. So here are all the links if you want to see them for yourself. And how it can look the same for all those versions is because there are no screenshots in the official documentation, which is something I've now added to my agenda for the upcoming Dig Hack Fest, because the bugginess, and I'm doing this in quotes, you can't see me, the bugginess of this is because you've got to figure out what values to put in which of these fields, which we're going to look at in just a second. And if we had really good examples of that have been tested out in the more recent versions of Evergreen, that would certainly help this documentation. So this, again, presentation is much a plea for testing and documentation as it is for functionality feedback at this point. So we need to document what it does before we can start asking for new things. In my preparing for this presentation, I did go back and track the history of when Mark Batch Edit, if it had any changes to it. The only real change we've seen is it was angularized in last year in October. So it now has an angular screen, and I'll show you what that looks like, but in 3.6, so it has the angular view. But none of the functionality changed. That Launchpad bug is just the development work that went into moving it to Angular. Bill Erickson did a demo for us last July when he was doing this work before it was released in October. So if you want to see his demo, it begins, so you don't have to watch the whole video again. It begins a little after, right at 14 minutes in. And I said there was no functionality. There's a small one kind of behind the scenes that improved the efficiency of it, but nothing as far as what we see with the user interface. Kind of gives us where we are, where we've been coming for the last few years with Mark Edit. It's still doing what it's done for years. These Launchpad bugs just gives you more of the history. These are some older ones. And these 4 down here are the only 4 open ones that are out there now. And a couple of them are really old. They're worth reviewing. And Mary Llewellyn has added notes to this last one. And she sent me her documentation too. Thank you so very much. Because she's found workarounds to some of the problems she found for that last bug there. So that's worth checking out to see the documentation that she's actually included in the Launchpad bug. I will note that if you're looking in Launchpad and if you're a regular user, there's a tag specifically for Batch Edit. And that means this tool, the Mark Batch Edit tool. And like I said, there are only 4 of them now. That's kind of more of just a review history. Okay. This is the Mark Batch Edit screen in 3.5. Very briefly, you'll notice at the top there's a record source. And I said you could have records stored in a bucket or CSV or just do an individual record itself. And so there's your bucket name. And then all of these are, and I'm going to go through these in more detail, but so the rest of the screen here is just about setting up your actions and defining what you want those to do. So that's 3.5, and this is what it looks like when it's angularized in 3.6. So backing up to 3.5, see how the record source and bucket name and the go button are up there at the top of the screen? It now gets moved to the right, so kind of more natural workflow, because you don't want to hit the go button until you're, well, ready to go at the end there. So other than that, this is exactly the same. I do have a question. Galen, you're still with us, and maybe this is off topic, but we call these template previews and template rules and merge rules, and the language is a little different here. Let me go back. There we go. Are these templates actually, these templates, as far as I know, are not stored anywhere, so we can reuse them. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're correct in the sense
Okay.
that they're not currently set up to be reused.
Okay. So that was one of the things. I will. That's how we start a wish list, though, isn't it? Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. So the template gets built. It's kind of auto-generated as you're filling out this screen. So again, so there was 3.5. And let me go 3.5. There's 3.6. So now how do you use this screen? I'm watching the time kind of closely. I was going to do a live demo, but I don't think I'll do that in the time we have left, because I do have just some really quick screenshots, and you'll have those in the slide here. You'll see, let me back up here. I'll talk about these in two different ways. Here, this first top that's above the top section, above the advanced matching restrictions, this optional piece, is really kind of the basics that you need to define your rule, your rules and your tag, and then bottom. So I'm going to talk about these in three different ways. I'm going to talk about the top section, the bottom section, and then the record preview stuff over there, the record source. So top section, you define your rule, and you have three options, and everything you see in red on here is my notes. They're not actually on the screen. So your options are to replace, add, or delete, and then your mark tag. These two things are the most straightforward on the screen, because this is the only place you're going to identify the mark tag itself. It's 3 characters. You put in, 020 if you're going to work with the oh gosh, with the ISBN. I'm talking too quickly and my mind's not catching up. Okay, with the 020 there. These other things, I'm going to give us examples about how to use the subfield in the mark data. The important thing here to remember is this is what you are, or what you're identifying that's to be edited. So if you're not editing a subfield, you don't have to put anything in there. In the mark data down here, it's mark breaker. It's got an example there about how the formatted data, you would put the indicators and then a subfield delimiter. This is what you're going to add data or replace the data, so you don't need it if you're deleting something. It just doesn't go there. And again, this isn't necessarily a how-to. This is just a brief introduction. What I want to get to is to be able to put together documentation that covers lots of different examples that will be our how-to documentation. We'll say that my notes down there at the bottom say that you can have additional matching, there are additional matching options, which we'll look at, and you can do multiple rules. So if you do want to add RDA tags this way, you could add a 336, you could then add another rule, add a 337, add a 338 all at one time before you hit the go button, and it would add all 3 of them at the same time. So you can just create multiple rules while you're working with batch data. And I keep So this is the, I talked a little bit about that. There's one caution here. If you think you want to add a 500, you have to think really hard about what you want to put in this subfield, because if you want to say add this sample note, and that's just what I've added there, if there's already a 500, it's going to append to that. It's not going to create a new 500 if you put something in that subfield that says optional, because it's saying, okay, you want to add to what is already there, and add to in that sense is then interpreted as append to, as opposed to create a new one. So if you want to just add a new 500 and not add to the one that's already there, leave that subfield blank. And this is the kind of example I think needs to go into the documentation with clear text on why why sometimes you would put that subfield in there, sometimes you wouldn't. But this case, it's just for that very reason. You don't want a 500A added on to the end of your current 500s. So just leave it blank. So that's the add. And I know I'm going through them because we're kind of low on time here, but the delete, I've got some of the same warnings here. If you're deleting, again, remember this top up here is about anything you're adding or editing or replacing. It's not really about deleting. So you leave the subfields blank and you leave the marked data blank. And what you're doing at the bottom here then, this is when you are matching to the existing data. So think about it when you're doing merge profiles and you're creating things that say, how are you going to match these records? That's what the bottom part of this screen is. So you say, if it's an A subfield for this 500 tag and it has a sampled note in it, like I just added, delete it. So it's blank up here at the top because you're not adding new data. It's included down here at the bottom because this is how you're defining the existing data that you want to delete. So it's pretty much new stuff at the top, existing stuff at the bottom, if you can think that way. And again, I'm going to start working through all these examples and then send them out for review so we can get them into the documentation. Lastly, this is a replace tag. Again, new stuff at the top, old matching stuff at the bottom. So if I just want to replace this abbreviated first EDT on my 250 on my addition statement and actually make it say first edition, what I have to do is I choose replace in my 250. I come down to the bottom and I say this is the current stuff that I want to match and that I want to replace. So then I just go up to the marked data and I put what I want the new field to look like, the new tag values. This kind of builds itself too. Once you put in the 250, it will auto-populate this equals the 250 thing for. So really you have to do is type in your A subfield there. Notice you don't put the A subfield up here because you're using that down here at the bottom to say this is what I want to take away and this is what I want to replace with. Okay. And
so you have to have information that you want to take away. You can't just, there's not like a, no matter what's in this field, I want it to now say this.
You can.
Okay.
You would just leave the expression blank.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. You can do that. And I say that with a lot of confidence, but I'm to the point where I want to test everything, every scenario that comes up like that, just to make sure and provide screen prints to make sure that it does that, which is where I think that we could use some extra hands to help test this out. So I'm going to start a shared document to do that, to document what I'm seeing with examples, and then parlay some of that into the actual community documentation and then start looking at some wish list stuff that we might want from here. Anybody using it now and you want to comment on kind of things that you're seeing about why you would actually encourage people to use it for a particular use case? Or things that you just think are obstacles that we really have to overcome that we need to document, I should say, not overcome.
Well, it can be useful if you just want to append a subfield 9 to an 856 for your digital resources.
Excellent. I forgot to mention that. That is most definitely the number one way this is used, I believe. Thank you. Because yeah, if you just want to identify your library on that 856, it works for that. And you don't have to take the data out of Evergreen to do it, to update it to bring it back. And I should say you can do that now on import too. If you import records in batch and move them over to a bucket during that import process, that workflow, you can just use this mark batch edit tool against that bucket, so you don't have to keep moving records around. You can say, here's the bucket I want to use. Yeah, thank you. I forgot about that, Mary. Okay, well, I hope I've introduced you to enough of MarcEdit that you'll use one of the community servers and just import some records using from Library of Congress or something, or use the data that's there. That's what community servers are meant for. And then kind of play around with this some too to see how it might be able to help. And then as we have questions for one another, again, I'm going to start that shared doc so that we can put together a repository of the ways this can work for us, the ways it can improve our workflows so that we can do things in batch instead of so often having to do them record by record. It really has some good possibilities there. And I'm impressed with the straightforward, the adding and deleting pieces. So thank you for that.
Jennifer, I just want to mention, a lot of people talk about being buggy. I found the biggest hurdle was not putting that subfield in the top, and that cleared up a lot of the bugginess for me.
Yeah, so and thanks to you is the reason I started going back through this, because I even found your Launchpad notes yesterday, and I thought, well, see, this is something that I think we need to document, because I think so many of us are trial and error people. We'll just keep trying different things on the screen, see if it works, and that's a perfectly good way to interact with the system. But if we can share what we've learned with other people too, I'm thinking our documentation really could use some work. So you've inspired me. Thank you to start doing that. Because if we've got, yeah. At first I thought it's a workaround, and then I thought, I think she's just figured out the magic to these screens. You have to decide what goes where, and it will work. Okay. We're almost at time. I always leave time for a community discussion. Is there anything as we're going into the conference? Things that, like authorities, I know that we've got so many different tentacles to that I do feel like we want to. I'm just going to make a note of here about Evergreen topics, Evergreen conference topics. Anything else people want to make sure that it's kind of on our radar as we're coming together as a group next month? I'm going to leave Mark right, just because that's what I'm going to do. Okay. Yep. As things come up, that's what the listserv is there for. Let me go back through notes here. Yep, I'm going back through the new original catalog or video. Never use mark batch on 856 because the risk of consequences. Well, the nice thing about this one is that you can really just test it one record at a time to see, and you can control and mark batch edit. And I'm not sure I put enough of a highlight on that to where you can just limit it to, if you've got 10 records that you want to update, you can do that because you're just going to put them in a bucket or a CSV file or one by one, instead of just, I would not. In fact, mark batch edit won't say just update everything like developers can do on the server side of things. We still can't just kick off a button and say update all the records. They have to live somewhere in a bucket or a file. Provides a little bit of that risk aversion that risk mitigation that we could use. But thanks for that note. It's also nice to know what kinds of directions we're doing, because sometimes it's just a matter of it. If it looks like it doesn't work, we've got other things to do, and so I'm hoping that we can document this to make it a good tool, a better tool. Okay, 3:00. That's it for me for April. In case anybody has any questions, I'll stick around for a little while. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all for being here. Wish you a wonderful few weeks until we get back together as a group at the conference. If you're not going to be at the conference, we will provide updates before, during, and after to make sure that this content, the content of our cataloging discussions, is made available to the cataloging working group. So from our interest group meetings, that we'll document those and put them on the wiki too. So thanks as always. Take care. See you next month.
Bye.
See you next month, everyone.